We are a group of friends, bound by our appreciation for liberty and good podcasting. Free-minded thinkers from all walks of life, our values come together with one accord to discuss the common culture and news of the day, along with whatever random crap is going on in our lives. Welcome to the Union of the Unknowns.
Hello world, and welcome to the latest thrilling edition of Union of the Unknowns. And I am hosting tonight. I'm Terry Canary, as you might know. Seems like I'm hosting for the first time in about 20 years, so excuse me if I make some mistakes, because I'm not really used to this. But I do have a fellow unknown with me here tonight, and it is the lovely, the wonderful, the intelligent Ashley Think, Change, Repeat.
Hello. Happy to be here with you, Terry. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you for asking. And I hope all is well over in the Carolinas, where you are. It's very dark over here, so I can get to bed. Again, can you still hear me, Ashley?
Yeah,
Hooray.
Okay, yeah, I actually lost you for a brief moment there. So I heard that it's dark over there and you may get to bed at a more reasonable time.
Yes, I'm hoping. So this is why I'm looking particularly alert at the moment compared to some of my recent podcasts. So tonight, Ashley and I are going to have a little health chat. And if it's okay with you, Ash, I'll do a little sort of preamble talk and see what you think. Great. She's thumbs up for people who are on audio only. So following on from our last chat, which I thought was very good, very interesting, this was kind of prompted by some recent tests I had done privately, and I'll come to that in a minute. My wife, Fiona, and I think we mentioned this last time, she has a condition called hemochromatosis, which means the iron level in her blood is very high, which is very bad for you because it deposits in all the organs of the body and causes a lot of damage. So you have to get it under control. So she's under the care of a hematologist at a local hospital. That means she has to have blood taken out every 3 months, which she hates, poor thing, but she has to put up with it. And she's got very thin veins, so it's always a bit of a trial for her. And a part of that, she has regular blood tests so that the hematologist can make sure her iron levels are under control. So this has kind of prompted me to have some tests done from time to time. And we're quite fortunate here in that we have labs where you can just rock up and ask for a blood test. And, you know, sometimes you have to book ahead, but it's just a matter of them taking a blood sample, sometimes a urine sample, and comes back a whole raft of measurements that most people don't understand without a bit of research and analysis. So anyway, that's where I am. So Ashley, you got anything to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that is one of the major failings of the medical system in general. And that's sort of one of the things that we like to talk about is not only natural solutions, but what people need to watch out for and be aware of while you are involved in the medical system. Because to a certain extent, all of us have likely need to have some involvement, whether that is just some type of annual checkup or a relationship with a general practitioner or whatever that may be. And so we need to know what we need to know. And one of those things is absolutely when you're getting blood work, what would be considered a normal marker or a healthy marker or an optimal marker for the blood work that you're getting? And that often does not coincide with what you're told from your regular doctor. For example, vitamin D, and we may have touched on this before, but this is a huge one for all kinds of health issues. And optimizing your vitamin D is one of the best things that you can do for your overall health and for many, many areas of health. But the range that you're given for what is acceptable from the medical community is actually not what is optimal. So these kinds of things happen a lot. And then not only that, when they're testing a handful of things, like, do we know? Are we getting a conversation? Are we being educated on what these different markers mean? And what does it mean for your particular situation? Back to you, Terry.
Thank you. Yeah, totally. I totally agree with all that. And you touched on a lot of things that I was hoping we were going to talk about. So so you've queued us up nicely there. I just want to sort of finish by what I'm saying by way of preamble, in that both Ash and I used to follow Dr. McCullough quite closely. And we both think he might be a little bit off form or doing some slightly odd things recently. I don't know if it's just he's getting old, but he still has quite a lot of good information on it, at least on his website. And his podcast I listen to still from time to time is called Take Control of Your Health. And that's a message that I'm very much in favour of. You've got to take control of your health, because if you haven't learnt from COVID that you cannot trust medical authorities and doctors with your own health, then you're never going to know, because these people, I'm afraid, do not have your best interests at heart a lot of the time. They have their own agenda. A lot of the time, that's just making money and pushing drugs on you, which you might not need. So, and a good way to sort of take a bit of control is, if you can, go and get your own blood test done. Your doctor might not be very keen on giving you the things that you want to get done. So if you can find a lab that will just do it, just by, as it happens here, you just turn up and ask for them, and they'll do it for you, no questions asked. You don't need a prescription or anything. So it's a really good way to find out what's going on in your body if you're worried about things. So what do you think, Ash?
Yes, I 100% agree. And actually, because I was so disenfranchised with the medical system, I ended up pursuing something, essentially health coaching. And they have contacts for a lab here in the United States that you can go and order, like, carte blanche tests that you want to get done. And they are a lot more affordable than what you may be getting from through going through the traditional medical routes from your doctor's office to the lab and dealing with health insurance and things like that. So I absolutely support pursuing getting your own blood work done. And here's the other thing that the reason why that may be important is because if you were, for example, hypothyroid or concerned about the health of your thyroid, and a lot of people are hypothyroid, and one of the main tests that you can do for that is checking your waking temperature first thing in the morning. So if your waking temperature is lower than like 97.8 or something to that effect, then you're exhibiting signs of hypothyroidism. So many of people struggle with that. But if you go to your doctor, they don't talk to you about that test, a simple, cheap, and easy way to test that. Then if they do run tests on your thyroid, it may only be for like T3 and T4, but there's thyroid stimulating hormone, there's T3, reverse T3, T4, quite a bit of a panel there, and they don't do that. And oftentimes they're like, well, we don't have a reason to do that. So, like, as in, you need to advocate for yourself to get that done. And if they're not doing it, then you can go to an independent lab. And I know I'm using, and probably in our last episode, use the thyroid example. It's just off the top of my head, but it's a really useful example of how, but can be extrapolated out to more things on how you can have something that you need to be testing, let's say like 4 markers, and then maybe doing your temperature, and they're not educating you or advising you on that. And while I do, have the same opinion of the healthcare industry as Terry, even if somebody is well-meaning, even if a doctor wants to do that, they are given a pretty strict area that they have to stay in. So these are all coming from, from administration, from health insurance, things like that are actively kind of preventing and trying to make someone justify the tests that they would like to get for themselves. So while, yes, they are in the meat grinder as well, but they often are not even questioning or going to bat for you to try to get you the information that you need. So, but I absolutely advocate for trying to pursue some of your independent blood work. And if anybody has any questions about the lab, it's called Ulta Labs, ULTA Labs, not the same thing as Ulta beauty supply store or the makeup store. So, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to send that link to you as well. But yes, very good, Terry. Back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, nice. We'll put that in the show notes if either of us remember to do so. But no, I'm glad you mentioned the thyroid thing, because I was going to go through a list of problems that occurred to me with, not with tests as such, but with the interpretation of tests that you might get from your doctor, and also with recommended ranges. And my first item on my list was the thyroid stuff, saying, you know, they often measure the wrong things. And that, you gave the perfect example there, because you know, you really need a whole panel of your thyroid hormones, and often you'll just get one. And I forget which one they offer you, it's T3 or T4, but it's useless on its own. You need the whole picture. And I think we touched on this last time. They also tend to treat hyperthyroidism with the wrong stuff as well. We used to treat it with desiccated thyroid, which obviously has everything you need for a thyroid, you know, in a sort of little handy dried form. But now they try to, because they want to just push drugs on you, they just try to treat you with one of the thyroid hormones. Again, I can't
Exactly.
remember if it's T3 or T4, but it's
I think it's usually T3.
Yeah. And I think we mentioned last time that Fiona got a Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune thyroid disease. So, and their idea of treatment was to wait until her thyroid was destroyed by her antibodies, and then give her some artificial thyroid hormone. Yeah, not the best idea, really. So, so that was number one on my list. They measure the wrong things. Number two, I've got their recommendations are often based on bad models. And the example immediately came to mind was cholesterol, because they've got this idea that high-fat diets are bad for you and cause high cholesterol, and cause cholesterol to deposit in your arteries, and that causes heart disease. There's almost no evidence for this. In fact, when people study, they do a correlation between cholesterol levels and length of life. They find that the higher your cholesterol level, the longer people tend to live. So, which isn't really surprising, because cholesterol is an essential element of all your cells. And if your doctor puts you on statins and he was able to reduce your cholesterol level down to near zero, well, you'd be dead long before then, because you can't survive without cholesterol. So it is a case of a very bad model. And if I mention briefly the tests that I did, I was very happy to see that my cholesterol was above their recommended range, because it's just not a very good way of measuring the health of your heart or your arteries. So yeah. So I'll pass back to you, see if you've got anything to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a limitation on what they test for the thyroid, and a limitation on the medication that they prescribe to you. So it will usually only treat one of these areas, like a T3, in and of itself, whenever you actually need the treatment of the full thyroid from, for example, the natural desiccated thyroid. That is often a lot more effective for people that are trying to rebalance what is happening with their thyroid hormones. And then, yeah, absolutely. Cholesterol is a really big one, because not only do you need cholesterol for a healthy functioning brain, you need cholesterol for all kinds of things, including your like processing vitamins and minerals in your body, and for regulating your hormones. You know, a lot of like an example for women that may have an irregular cycle, you need to make sure that you're getting enough cholesterol. And obviously for many, many years, we have had the message of cholesterol being demonized as part of the problem for heart disease. Meanwhile, we know what they're leaving out, which is addressing seed oils, environmental toxins, xenoestrogens, all kinds of stuff that are environmental factors that they don't address with, how about the fact that they always like to tell you to stay out of the sun, which is literally life-giving on this earth and one of the healthiest things that you can do. So a lot of this stuff ties in together. And then the other thing with the cholesterol conversation is that they will prescribe somebody statins. But what they don't, and we know that the medical industry and the pharmaceutical complex are very guilty for this. Like, they will rattle off side effects on a commercial, but when it comes to your doctor sitting there having a conversation with you, oftentimes you are not educated at all on what could be some potential side effects that may make you second guess, and you're not presented with options. So let's say that they're concerned about your cholesterol. Well, what they're not educating you on is the need for cholesterol. Maybe they should be educating you on polyunsaturated fats that are often found in seed oils or in, like processed chicken and pork, and those things are bad for you. But let's up, and Terry's a big proponent for this, for your coconut oil, which is a medium branch fatty acid, and it's very healthy for you. It helps you lose weight. It helps all kinds of functions of the body. So they're not discussing that with you, yet they are willing to give you the statin or the pill. And then they don't address the fact that there are oftentimes memory problems that people will have who start taking statins because you have cholesterol in your brain. And so it's just an entire, so many things that need to be considered that we just take for granted if you're in the regular system, that so many people and so many of us don't even know to think or ask or question.
Yes, I totally agree. And there's a couple of things I can say about cholesterol that you've sort of prompted me to think about. As far as I know, there's very little evidence that high-fat diets raise cholesterol in the first place, particularly high animal fats. I remember reading about a guy who was eating a ridiculous amount of eggs every day. I can't remember. It's possibly one of these bodybuilders, but his cholesterol level actually went down after a few months on this regime. And there's some alternative health people who think, there is people with heart disease do often have cholesterol deposited in their arteries. But there's a lot of alternative health people who think that might be a symptom rather than a cause, and that the body's trying to use that cholesterol to do something good and repair some damage, which is why it's there. It's a bit like what some people say about bacteria and viruses, that they're just there to sort of as part of the cleanup crew rather than causing disease. And what was the other thing I was going to say? It's gone out of my head now. Anyway, so that was part of, sorry, I nearly fell off my chair. That was part 2 of my problems with tests. I've got a few more here. I think you touched on this, that the ranges that will give you, the recommended ranges, either from the doctor or from the lab themselves, are extremely poor quite often. They're generally based on 2 different things. They look at a load of people and sort of measure, say you're looking at, I don't know, serum iron. They measure what the serum iron is in those people, and then they use a 95% confidence interval to come out with a recommended range. So 95% of the people they test will be in that range. But the problem is that, they're using Western people, and unfortunately these days, the average Western person is not terribly healthy. So they're coming up with ranges based on people who aren't healthy, rather than sort of picking out 100 people who are in the prime condition and saying we're going to use these people to get our ranges. I think they tend to use just averages, and average people, the average person in the West is not in good shape. So that's 100%. One way they do it. And the other way they do it, you come in there if you want. Okay, so just to finish off this part, the other way they will do it is, and that applies to something like vitamin D, for example, they will work out a quantity that just avoids deficiency. So that means the recommended lower limit for vitamin D is ridiculously low. If I have a look at my spreadsheet here, I think it's about 40 or something.
I think 40 maybe.
You guys are American. Yeah, I think you guys in America use different units. We measure in milligrams, nanograms per milliliter. I think you measure in something else. I forget what now. But anyway, just to finish what I'm saying. So in our units, they recommend 40, and that's way too low. It should be at least 80, and a lot of people recommend 100 or more. So I think you use different units in the US, Ash. So perhaps you can tell me what they are in America, if you know.
That is a very good question, and I'm actually not sure what that notation is, or like parts per million or something. I don't know, but basically the range is, I think if you're in the range of 40 like mg/Lu or whatever it is, then you are at a lower end of truly acceptable for fairly good health. Like, you would like to get it higher than that. But yeah, back to what you were saying, as far as where the information in these ranges are coming from, yes, what is the average? Where are they getting the average? Because we need to understand exactly what Terry is saying, is that it may not be the healthiest people that they are getting this information from. We know that they are putting all kinds of stuff, dyes, junk, like who knows what all they're putting in the food, and never mind even the seed oils, right? The preservatives, like all these things. And that's only one factor. Then we obviously have the water potentially being contaminated with fluoride, with SSRIs, with birth control, with these estrogen, things that are going to increase estrogen in the population. Whatever like Alex Jones is saying is turning the frogs gay, like that, and glyphosate, and that being sprayed on the wheat, and like all kinds of things that we need to take into consideration. And the other thing that I wanted to say is, just from a frame of thinking, to be able to extrapolate out and question some other things, would be like in COVID, for example. So then we were getting numbers of people who were diagnosed positive with COVID. But what we actually know is that they were using a faulty test to begin with. They were using the PCR test. We know that the creator and the founder of the PCR test, Carrie Mullis, specifically said that it could never be used for detecting viruses. It should never be used in the situation in which they used it in, right? So it's one of those things. It's like, once you know that foundational information, then you need to be questioning.
Excuse me for a moment, listeners and viewers. I believe the cat has disconnected Ashley's audio. Can you still hear me, Ashley? This happens from time
Can you
to
hear
time
me?
in Ashley's life. You know, if you live with cats, you know that they sometimes jump on the keyboard. Yes, I can. Sorry, we missed the last bit of what you were saying there.
Perfect. So basically, in regards to the COVID situation, so then we know that we need to question anything that could be associated with a PCR test at all, right? And we know that there are other questions, like how many repetitions did they run the PCR test on? We know that it was more likely, the more reps they ran, the more likely you are to get a positive result. So that is just one situation that we know was built. A lot of phony information was getting out to the public based on that specific premise. And then once again, it's the same thing with all of these other like little individual issues, such as cholesterol. Like, what is the true effect of statins, such as thyroid supplementation and thyroid testing, like all of these things. So I know that they're small examples, but we really want to use these examples to start looking at testing as a whole, education as a whole, what they're telling us or not telling us, so that we can be more informed and be more of an advocate for ourselves and for our families. Back to you, Terry.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Testing could be the subject of a whole podcast in itself. There's some fairly, what most people find complicated mathematics involved in testing. But the basic idea is that you can either make a test really sensitive, which means it will be very good at detecting true positives, but it also picks up a load of false positives. Or on the other side of the coin, you can make it what they call really specific, which means it's very good at rejecting. If you get a negative test, it's likely to be negative, but it also throws out a lot of positives. So, and what they did with COVID is they turned it all the way up kind of to 11 on the sensitivity, which means it was catching a whole lot of false positives, excuse me. In some estimates, more than 95% of positive tests were actually negative for COVID. And, it's like Ashley was saying, because they were using such a high cycle threshold on the PCR test, they were probably picking up little tiny fragments of dead virus, probably somebody who's hardly had any contact with COVID or has cleared the disease from his system, months and months ago. So yeah, not a good idea. And that also has some implications for doing things like screening with mammographies, for example, because what they like to do is they like to say, well, we're screening. They started off screening all the old people who were at high risk for breast cancer, but once you start extending that testing down to younger people, you're going to end up with a whole load of false positives, because it's basically because young people are much less likely to have breast cancer, but the test is still picking up certain things that aren't really cancer. And there's also a bit of a boondoggle that goes on there, in that they call things, they name things like stage 0 cancer as stage 0 cancer, when in fact it's not cancer at all. It's in many cases a benign tumor, and it causes a lot of young women a lot of stress, because the test itself, as you would know, Ashley, it's not very pleasant to go through. My wife used to hate it, but then she doesn't go anymore because she doesn't think it's worthwhile. So I don't know if you want to say something on that before I get back to my list.
Yes, I'll try to make it quick, but yeah, 100%. So as far as the mammography situation, then they're obviously looking for things that could scare you whenever you never needed to be scared to begin with. The test itself, and Dr. Mercola does warn about this, can be very traumatic, because it is quite rough on the breast tissue. Just the procedure of like smashing, basically. So that is one thing. And then the other factor, of course, is the radiation that you're exposed to get the test done. So I definitely have a lot of issues with that. And then I'm going to put a pin in this for us to maybe talk about either today or some other time, but the whole classifying something as stage 0, because this is a big kind of scam that is happening in the dermatology field, where they like to classify a lot of places on your body as concerning, and then they love to cut it off and they love to send it to the pathologist. And in the meantime, people get very, very scared about this. And there's so much to be said just alone on the fear of skin cancer, the fear of sun exposure, and the dermatology profession. But I want to get back to your list, Terry.
Yeah, sure. I'm really pleased you mentioned that, because just to finish your thought, it's worth bearing in mind that tests like mammograms and what's it called, where they cut a bit of tissue out to measure it, are not without risk, because both of those things can act. If you've got cancer, they can spread it around the body, because, as you say, actually, when you're crushing the tissue, you can break up the cancer cells and spread them throughout the body. So you have to bear in mind that tests aren't without risk. Yes, Ash?
Biopsy.
Biopsy. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Words fail me sometimes at this time of night. Back to my list. More problems with tests. The really interesting stuff can be difficult to measure. There's obviously a limited amount of things that they can measure, and so they tend to focus on that. So, for example, we were talking about cholesterol, and it's actually the ratio of LDL, low density lipoprotein, and HDL, high density lipoprotein, which is actually a somewhat more accurate measure. I'm still not sure it's all that good. And in fact, there was I remember reading a book with this guy who was a physicist. So he had access to some very fancy physics type equipment. And he sort of got interested in biology. He decided that what they really should be measuring is something called VLDL, which is very low density lipoprotein. and labs can't do that. So they ignore that problem. And he said it was a much better marker of whether you've got problematic cholesterol or not. And I think he had to use something like a mass spectrometer or something, which, you know, most labs haven't got. So he was able to get what he felt was a more accurate measure of what, you know, what might be problematic in the body. And, you know, most labs just can't do that. So they focus on the things they can measure and then come up with some model using those measurements to say this is good or this is bad. So not the best, really. And iron is another example, because we were talking earlier on about hemochromatosis, and actually I've got 140 gene for hemochromatosis, and my recent test showed that some of my iron markers are pretty high. So that might be something I need to do something about, because it's I think I mentioned last time, it's the most common genetic fault in Westerners, and it's a much more common problem than low iron, and it's much worse for you as well. And you know that a lot of times doctors and labs will focus on serum iron, and that's almost useless as a measurement, because it's actually the iron is bound up in two molecules called ferritin and transferrin, which also circulate in the blood. So you have to measure those as well. And the whole thing is very complicated, because the iron gets shifted backwards and forwards by the body between these different areas, or into the cells themselves, like, you know, deposited on the liver or what have you. So it's almost impossible to work out how much. Believe me, I've looked into this in great depth. It's practically impossible to work out how much iron you've got in your body. It'd be really interesting to know. So they just tell you what they can measure, and it doesn't really tell you the whole picture. But and it's also complicated by the fact that, you know, if, for example, you have an infection or inflammation, then I forget what the body does, but it shunts the iron into either transferrin or ferritin. I forget now. So that means that when you've got an infection, those levels go up and another level goes down. It's incredibly complicated, and then, you know, so no one can really tell you the whole story about iron, sadly, because it'd be very interesting to know. So I don't know if you've got any comments to make on that.
Okay, can you hear me? Sorry about that. I felt like I was getting some kind of delay.
That's okay. Yes, can now.
Perfect. So, yeah, I find it interesting. I don't know a ton about the iron, just that, yes, that a lot of times people can have too much, and that it is a healthy option is for people to, whether or not you have too much iron and you absolutely need to get rid of the iron, or just in general, there is definitely longevity associated with donating blood on a regular basis, and that's probably good for all of us, just to do and regenerate that fresh blood. So I do think it's interesting, although I don't know that much about it, what you're talking about, the iron, that it's very difficult for them to truly know how much iron you actually have in your body. And it does make sense that not only do you have it in the blood, and it's obviously an important component there, but then it's going to be scattered throughout the body. And it's an interesting one because it's in the metals family. So we definitely need to be aware of that. But that was an interesting tidbit that I didn't know about. So I don't have a lot to add on iron. Back to you.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of more things I said. The body does use it to fight infection, which is kind of interesting. So it moves it into a certain place if it detects signs of infection to help fight whatever it is that's infecting you. The hemochromatosis gene itself is actually a Celtic thing. So if you've got any Celtic blood in you or Celtic ancestry, it might be worth checking it out, because which is why, you know, my wife being Scottish, presumably that's why she's got two bad genes, and I've got one. So and apparently it's very common in Spain as well. So we thought we would have trouble making any headway with the doctors here, but because they had a lot of Celts in the north of Spain, it's also quite common in Spain as well. So there you go. When I used to run a lot, that's one way you can reduce your iron, actually. So because I think your body excretes iron because your muscles get broken down and the iron gets excreted, you know, because of if you do a lot of exercise. I can't do that anymore. And if I could donate blood, that would be the easiest way of doing it, because as you say, Ashley, it's associated with health, with positive health markers. But unfortunately, because I come from the UK, my blood is banned from being donated because of mad cow disease. So there you go. Not that I've been exposed to it, but it's we always find it quite ironic because you can be triple jabbed for COVID and have spike protein flowing throughout the body, and there's no problem about giving blood there. And of course, I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that blood. But apparently, if you're from the UK, that you're a high risk. Just shows you that. Yeah, another thing they get a bit wrong. To finish off, Marley, the last thing I was going to say about test ranges is that people like the FDA and the CDC get a lot of pressure from big pharma to change their ranges so that they can push more drugs. And blood pressure is a fantastic example of that, because normal blood pressure was, I can't remember what range it was, but it was, the top of the range was quite high. And they've been steadily bringing that down so that now when you go in, your doctor can say, well, your blood pressure's a bit high. Maybe you should try these statins. And so statins, I could say a lot about. My wife is a biochemist, as some of you might know. So she looked into what statins are actually doing in the body. And she's very into biochemical pathways. And it interferes at a very fundamental level with some very important biochemical pathways. And when she showed me this, I thought, Jesus Christ, there's no way I'm taking these things. So, which is why you get so many side effects with these things. So I wouldn't be touching them with a 10-foot pole, particularly not if your blood pressure is just a little bit, high over the new range that they've set up for it. So over to you, Ash.
Absolutely. And I've even seen where even just getting a more balanced electrolyte profile is sometimes all that people need in order to balance out that blood pressure. So for example, we know that from the electrolyte perspectives, we have potassium, sodium, magnesium. Well, sometimes it could be that you're out of balance in that you have too much sodium, but and so that could exhibit as high blood pressure, but actually you just need to add some, maybe some potassium and magnesium to that to balance it out. Now, obviously, we're not here to give health advice. We just want to encourage people to start, thinking about things and advocating for their health in maybe a different way, and at least opening up that conversation. So I'm not saying this is how to treat high blood pressure, but I'm just saying I have seen where people added potassium to their diet because they just had too much sodium. So they just balance out the sodium with the other electrolytes, and then they were able to kind of get that into control. And then, yes, back to what Terry was saying, that's another thing that we need to think about is like the range that they're giving. Who came up with that range? And that would be in the same way. Obviously, we know that obesity is an issue. And in my personal opinion, obesity is a weapon. They know the powers that shouldn't be, or the predator class, in my opinion, they know what is going to have a population fat, sick, and nearly dead. And they are doing it to us. And so I absolutely believe that the glyphosate and the seed oils, the hormone disruptors, and all of the other toxins that are in food, and the difficulty that they create in getting healthy food that is local is all intentional. It is warfare on us. So, and I do actually, if we have time, I have a little bit of a story about the food issue that I would like to say. If not, I can add it. We can talk about it another time. But so I just want to say that I believe that the obesity and the health epidemic is being done intentionally to us. It is a form of warfare. We have obese people, and it's not because everyone is just some lazy slob. Okay. The population of the United States from the 1950s to now, yes, it has changed, but it's not so much that there is just no similarity to what was there. It's because this is what you have with a population that's being poisoned and targeted and attacked. So with saying that, though, tying it back into what Terry was saying, the ranges for obesity and BMI and things like that have even been changed from what they were before. So before you had maybe a little bit of a wider range of what would be considered a healthy BMI, but this is another area that they're moving the goalposts in order to kind of stretch out the range of what would be considered overweight and obese. And like what Terry was saying, that not only when you're changing the metric there, you're making yourself more likely to be a candidate for the statins or for the blood pressure medication or something like that. And now that we've seen the, sort of the coming onto the scene, the GLP-1 inhibitors, which would be your Ozempic, your Wegovy, and there's a handful of others that are out there. But perhaps that's the play here, and we also know that diabetes is a huge problem. And oftentimes people are like, well, just stop eating so much sugar. It's not what we have been told that it is. Okay. But they are offered something like a Wegovy or a GLP-1 inhibitor or Ozempic. And once again, perhaps because these ranges of what qualifies as being obese or whatever is being fiddled with, then more people are allowed to be considered obese or allowed to, whatever, to potentially be a candidate for this medication. Now, I want to have the caveat that I think in the traditional medical system, unless you are morbidly obese, I believe that it would be difficult for you to get a prescription for a GLP-1 inhibitor for weight loss only. If somebody knows different, please reach out and let me know. But I believe that the weight loss factor would probably only be for insurance coverage, like in extreme situations, whereas the GLP-1 inhibitor is freely prescribed, from my understanding, for people that are dealing with diabetes and blood sugar issues. So just food for thought. And then this is another type of medication that has a lot of potential health effects. We have heard about gut peristalsis. So basically your intestines are not moving in a healthy way to process and to get the food and the waste out of your body. That's one thing. In addition to that, because those people that were having gut peristalsis, they would have sometimes really horrible breath. And of course, like, maybe if you're not educated, you don't know why you would be having that because you're not aware. It's because it's literally backing up from your intestines. It has nothing to do with your oral hygiene in general.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that situation. We've heard about people literally going blind from the use of the GLP-1 inhibitors and the fact that it maybe attacks other tissues because you have GLP-1 in other parts of the body. It's not just involved in like the creation of fat or whatever that is. So just another example of buyer beware. And I'm not saying there's never a circumstance that something like this wouldn't be helpful for somebody, but I'm just saying, like, we're just so often not told the whole story. Back to you, Terry.
Thank you. Yeah, I haven't really looked into things like Ozempic and what they actually do, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're also interfering with some fundamental and rather vital pathway in the body, because that's what these they're very, the drugs they often give you are very kind of highly non-specific, and they have lots of effects on the body, which is why a lot of them have some bad side effects. But now, I'm pleased you mentioned BMI, because it's another example of kind of what I was talking about. And they use this very crude measure to try and tell you whether you're fat or not. And it doesn't work for athletes, for example, because athletes have a lot of muscle and they tend to be, kind of dense in the physical sense. So their BMIs often come out over the recommended range, but they're obviously in very good shape. And I remember some, I think it was in the UK, some 15-year-old boy who was very into sport, and he went for his measurements at the school, and they said, "Oh, your BMI is too high. You need to lose weight." And this guy was sort of like rippling with muscle as an athlete. So again, a lot of the times these people doing the tests or trying to interpret the tests don't really know what they're doing. They're just following a kind of like a system, a protocol, and it's very hard for them to think out of the box. And that's a problem that's getting worse and worse now, because things like COVID have seemed to have sorted out the worst and kept the worst and got rid of the best. So yeah, what else was I going to say? Coming back on your thing about getting poisoned and diabetes and obesity, not necessarily just being about eating lots of sugary things. I remember seeing some research that suggested that artificial sweeteners were having a very bad effect on the metabolism, and that was one of the things that were causing people to put on weight. It was kind of skewing their metabolism and having a very fundamental effect on their metabolic health. So they weren't necessarily perhaps eating more than I would. I mean, I eat a hell of a lot, and I'm not, I'm a little bit overweight, but I'm not obese by any means. So yeah, things are always more complicated than a lot of times doctors and lab people would like to make out. Sorry, over to you. I think I'm finished.
No worries. Yeah, I do. I absolutely think there's always a lot more to the picture. And certainly BMI needs to be considered in like what you're talking about in a situation of if someone's being super muscular or something like that. And just like the entire conversation around health and sugar and all that stuff, I'm sorry. And I know a lot of people are probably going to be upset by this, but it's wrong. You have been lied to about sugar. If you follow the work of Broda Barnes and then after that, Dr. Ray Peat, who was focused on metabolic health, you need sugar in your diet and carbohydrates to support your thyroid. So oftentimes, yes, people can lose weight on a ketogenic diet and a low carb diet. Yes, you can lose weight, but what damage is it causing to your thyroid, which is responsible for your entire metabolism? It is so important to have a healthy thyroid. So I'm not saying to go out there and eat, Krispy Kreme, but what I'm saying is that there is something to getting sugar and fruit or sugar and carbs from honey and fruit and the occasional table sugar, like in your coffee and things like that, that it actually is not the enemy. And I'm actually feel like in the way that we've talked about so many things being psychological operations as the war on people, I think that the lie about sugar being the bad thing has been that. Because what did you have from that? You had people ingesting artificial sweeteners. You had people going for low sugar this and low sugar that and trying to completely eliminate that out of the diet. But look at people reducing sugar, and is the population healthier? No. It's the same thing for them accusing or basically putting it on you that you have skin cancer because you're out in the sun too much and you have bad genes. But yet, if you look at a diagram of the use of sunscreen over time and the prevalence of skin cancer, it hasn't gone down. Why is that? If sunscreen actually worked, if it was actually sun exposure, then why wouldn't you have some positive correlation with the increased use of sunscreen and things like that? I'm just saying that all of this stuff is worth considering, and I'm not definitely saying that I'm like 100% right on everything. I'm just saying that we need to be open to these conversations. And I'm not telling somebody to go out there and have sugar. If you don't want to have sugar, don't. But I'm just telling you, I think that if you believe that the food pyramid is wrong and you believe that we've been lied to about medical health and that we have been lied to about diet, then why would you believe them when they're saying that sugar is the enemy? Why don't you believe that maybe seed oils are the enemy or artificial dyes are the enemy or anything else? I'm just saying food for thought. And Terry, before we move on, I do want to say that we had some questions in our YouTube chat. So a squirrel had some topics that they would maybe like us to see us discuss. So I don't think we have time for all of this today, but we can put it on our list. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that Knights of the Storm definitely has talked a lot about EMF and the effects there. I don't know if they've talked about forever chemicals, but we would be happy to have these discussions here as well. So thank you for that, a squirrel. And then one more thing, Terry. They said, has your guest heard of the communitarian governance that has replaced communism and crony capitalism? I don't know about that one. What about you?
It's a new one on me.
Yeah, so maybe we
No,
can
not
look
really.
into that.
No. Well, I'll look into it, yeah. But the other questions are very good about EMF and the toxic stuff put on. Yeah, I'm all for talking about that. Gain of function biowarfare experiments. Yeah, it's interesting. Both you and I might be somewhat skeptical about that. I think, mightn't we? Whether there was actually a real virus that was causing problems. I really can't decide. I wish I knew. If I had access to God for one night, that would be the question I'd ask him, I think. Do viruses cause disease? I just can't decide. Yeah, so very good questions though. Well, hopefully we'll do this again and we can get back to that. But I just want to. I'm going to try and sort of round up what I was talking about, and maybe we can get to your story you wanted to tell. But you talked earlier on about vitamin D. I think it's super important to optimize that. If there's one thing you're going to do, get that measured and try and get it up to a decent level. And don't pay any attention to the recommended level that you're told to get it up to. You've got to be a lot higher than that. 80, some people say 100. That's what I would go for. Mine, I was happy to say, was I think 87. So and sun exposure is super important. But I should say that when Fiona spent a lot of time in Scotland, obviously was brought up in Scotland and England, not much sun, and she, I'm afraid, fell for the propaganda that sun was bad for you. So she was using sun creams all the time. So when she started measuring her vitamin D, it was catastrophically low. Now she was out here in the Canary Islands trying to get sun every day, and she couldn't get her vitamin D levels up at all. So whether that's because she'd done some damage, to her body, because as you know, she's got MS, or also the way the body makes vitamin D falls off as you get older, so you become less efficient at it. So she had to take supplements to get her vitamin D level up, and a lot of people do, particularly if you live in northern climes. You should be getting a supplement, but she tried a lot of different ones, and she found that it was only the liposomal ones from Mercola that actually worked. So you might have to try a few different things to get your levels up. But there's a few other things you can look at. Glucose is good, fasting glucose. HbA1c, which is like glycated hemoglobin, which is the sort of the compound of hemoglobin and sugar, which is a more medium-term measure of how much sugar you've had going around your system. I mean, sugar's a complicated thing. I'm with you. I don't think it's really black and white that all sugar's bad. My view on food is always more towards ancestral eating. So if you're eating things that hunter-gatherers would have, more or less, because we've bred different types of fruits over the years, so they're not quite like the ones we used to get, when we were hunter-gatherers. But I eat tons and tons of fruit, and my weight is good. So I don't think eating fruit will make you put on weight. You wouldn't believe the amount of fruit I eat in one day. It's much more than most people. And measuring your liver enzymes is kind of useful as well. GPT, GOT, GGT. I can tell you what they stand for if you like, but you don't really need to know that. It's a good measure of how well your liver is functioning. They need to be fairly low. Bear in mind, if you have a drink of alcohol the night before, that will push some of those levels up, so you won't get a decent reading. So you have to go dry for at least a day. I'm happy to say I've been dry for 3 weeks now, actually. I've got 2 more weeks to go. I really fancy a drink. So maybe we could get to your story if we've got time.
Yeah, for sure. And congratulations on your on being dry for 3 weeks. I didn't know that you were on a mission for this 5 weeks, but congratulations to you. I don't drink. It's probably about 5.5 years now since
Thank
I
you.
have drank anything. Just because I was
Wow. Very
yeah,
good. I
yeah.
tried. Sorry, yeah, no, congratulations. That's even better. I was just going to say I try to do it once a year, normally for about a month, just to show that I can do it, because obviously I'm not physically dependent. I'm not an alcoholic or anything. I'm not physically dependent, right? But I do like a drink when I'm going to bed, and I sort of look forward to it, and so I'm sort of psychologically dependent on it. So I like to prove to myself that I can do without it for a bit. And the first few days, you know, you sort of, it's because you're in that habit of having a drink at bedtime, it's hard not to do it. And then you stop thinking about it. Well, when I get to this phase, when I'm about halfway through, I just think, oh, it'd be really nice to have one again.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that I was sensitive to alcohol. Like I would be somebody that could have one drink and I would feel very tipsy. So it was easy for me to get to where I didn't feel well after not that much alcohol. Felt hungover, what felt like easier than other people. And I finally just got to the point I was like, this just is not this is not my thing. I just need to give it up. Now I have in the
Yeah.
past sometimes
Yeah.
had a non-alcoholic beer, which is not bad. You know, if you would like to have a beer, it's definitely not it's not bad, but I'm doing gluten-free at the moment. I'm trying to do gluten-free at the moment. So, I'm not having ever a non-alcoholic beer, but when I did, it wasn't bad.
Nice.
So I wanted to bring up this comment. Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War, where he encouraged knowing your enemy. Here in Seattle, we figured out the communitarians are the enemy. Oh, okay. Yeah, we definitely need to do some digging into that, a squirrel and figure that out. But it, it doesn't sound too far off the mark
It's
there.
obviously some sort of collectivism, isn't it? It sounds a bit communistic. So it's sort of some sort of collectivist idea, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. So a quick story in regards to our health, in regards to our access to natural food, in regards to a war being declared on us. Actually, today in North Carolina, the legislature was going to be voting on a North Carolina Farm Act bill. And Section 20 of that bill was actually for them to make a cow share program and buying raw milk for pets only illegal. So, just to tell people, if you're not familiar with what a cow share is, because of the laws against buying and just being able to buy raw milk for yourself and your family, they came up with a way to be able to still have access. So, what it is that you become part of a co op, basically, of a dairy farm, and you purchase part of a cow at the beginning of the year or whatever time it is in the year. So you have a fee for that. So that means that you're part owner, which means that you are allowed to have raw milk. And then from there, you just buy your weekly allotment of milk. For me, it's a gallon of milk a week, raw milk, right? And in this way, I feel good because not only am I getting raw milk, but I'm also supporting a local dairy farmer, people that I know personally that I very much like and want to support their cause. And so this section 20 of this particular bill takes out the ability to be part of a cow share program, meaning that they're telling you, even if you own the cow or part of the cow, that you are not allowed to have raw milk. And even if you wanted to buy raw milk for your animals only, you're not allowed to do that either. So I got the notification from the farm last week, and I did post this on Twitter. But I also sent out an email to every one of the people that were part of this committee, and I just said, and I was respectful, even though we all know that I'm no fan of politicians in general. But I just said, hello. I just wanted to ask you to kindly remove this section of the bill. This is going to be harmful for farmers, and people of North Carolina should be able to buy milk, the kind of milk that they want. So please reconsider taking this out. And I heard back from one of them right away who had said, that she also had been part of a cow share, and she had to do that in order to get raw milk for her son, and that she would discuss it with them. And then I got an email from someone's assistant. And that's really all that I heard back from this list of like almost 20 people that were on this committee. So, you know, I just wanted to share that because it is an attack on our health. If you're somebody that believes that raw milk is the healthier thing for you to do, and I do believe that and subscribe to that, then of course, as a human on this earth, I should be able to make the decision if I want raw milk or not. So I'm quite incredulous that anybody thought that they have the ability to tell other adults that they cannot drink raw milk. And of course, it's my responsibility and the responsibility of me and my relationship with the farm and the farmer for me to ensure that I'm supporting a high quality business that takes safety of raw milk and raw food seriously. But I'm an adult. I can do that. So, I just wanted to throw that in there because I think it's topical, because it's part of the war on our food, and the war on our food is the war on us and the war on our health. And the other thing about that, when you are, as the documentary said, fat, sick, and nearly dead, then you're not aware and with it and feeling well enough to fight the tyranny that is happening. And I mean, and I'm not talking about fighting in a physical form. I mean fighting, I mean being mentally clear enough to be ideologically opposed, to be mentally clear enough to hold on to your to your ideals and to see what's happening. When you're fat, sick, and nearly dead, then you are much more easy candidate, or easier pickings for these people, for them to do the MK Ultra techniques that they have practiced on humanity for a very long time. They know that whenever people are in a state of non-mental clarity, meaning in some of these cases drugged, but in our cases it's like the fluoride, it's the food, it's the whole thing of just mentally foggy. Then you have the hypnosis aspect of the blue screens, television, propaganda constantly, and then you have them running a fear campaign about something at all times, whether that's race relations, whether that is for a disastrous weather event, whether that is measles. That's a big thing lately that they've been really going on about, is the risk for measles. So basically you're combining these four things of hypnosis, drugging, fear, and trauma that you constantly see, and this is how you get to an MK Ultra population. This is how you get to pull off something like COVID. So if we can start taking back some of our ownership over our food decisions, our health decisions, and at least start holding these people accountable in small ways by asking questions and advocating for ourselves and our families, then we're moving in the right direction. That was long. My apologies. Over to you, Terry.
No, that was good stuff. That's just crazy. That I've never had raw milk myself, but I do know that it's supposed to be super good for you, and it's kind of like a superfood, really. And it helps your microbiome because it's got a lot of good bacteria in. And when you pasteurize milk, you're killing off a lot of those, obviously, which is, they argue that we're just killing off the bad bacteria, but you're killing off most of the bacteria, really. So you turn in something that's really this nice soup of good things into, something a bit plain and boring and not so good for you. And the situation is similar over here. It actually maybe think of the question whether, if you own the whole cow, whether you'd be allowed to drink the milk from the cow, but maybe you could reply to that in a minute. But to sort of come full circle back to Mercola I was talking about at the beginning, I heard a podcast recently of him talking to those sisters who are followers of Ray, Pete, Ash, and Sarah. I forget their full names. You probably know them, Ash. And they were talking about cheese and how it should be a superfood, but it's because it's been monkeyed about with so much now, it's not really that good for you. And one of the reasons, there's two reasons: they should be using animal rennet, and because of the vegetarian pressure groups, they've been taking that out and using vegetarian rennet, which is, I think, grown in a lab on a fungus or something, maybe on aspergillus fungus, which is basically, it's kind of like the black mold you get on the walls when your house is damp. So not great really for people who have that sort of sensitivity. And also the EU, amongst other people, forced farmers to use pasteurized milk when they're making cheese. And again, you're eliminating all the good bacteria. So the cheese you're getting should be full of these lovely good bacteria, and they've been sort of sterilized by the pasteurization process. So they've turned what should be a superfood into something, again, sort of plain and not so tasty and not so good for you. So yeah, have you got any final thoughts, Ash?
Well, just really quickly, I did want to say that before I became a member of the raw milk co-op, I didn't necessarily understand the difference in taste. It wasn't, an issue for me. And lately we've only been drinking raw milk, and that's what I have in my coffee. That's what, if I have a glass of milk or whatever, that's what I have. Well, we had some friends that were visiting, and they ended up getting a small thing of whole milk for their kid. And I didn't want to go to waste. So I tried some of that, and I was like, oh, this tastes terrible. It literally, like, it is so different. The color, the consistency, it's a lot more like water, really, versus the raw milk that I get that's full fat whole milk that is really nice and creamy, and it has a beautiful cream color to it. It's really totally different, and it's pretty amazing. But I've seen the same thing with people having like a steak from a local farm versus a steak that they picked up at the grocery store. There's obviously a huge difference there. So just to have that last point. But otherwise, thank you, Terry, because you brought up a lot of really good points. You've led a really good discussion and a lot of interesting things that I'm learning about. And I think that the audience has been interested. And I did want to say thank you so much to everybody who joined us live. We had Dream Real stopped by over on YouTube, and a squirrel stopped by. Unfiltered News Tube service stopped by as well. So we appreciate you. And then over on our Rumble channel, we had Knights of the Storm, Spirit of the Age, Birdhouse Blues. And I think I covered that. If I'm missing anyone, my apologies. But I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us live and for your participation in the chat. It's really lovely. It's a lot of fun. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Terry for having a nice list of things for us to discuss.
Thank you, Ashley. And we will try and get back to some of those questions and topics that people suggested, so because there's some good stuff there. But I think my final message would be, as I said at the front of the podcast, try and take control of your own health. You can't rely on health professionals and doctors and even people who run labs to give you the best advice. So looking at things yourself. I've got a few sort of trusted places that I like to go to, and I've made my own spreadsheet based on their recommendations rather than using the recommendations from a lab or from a doctor. So people like Nicola, Mark Hyman used to be quite good on this. Chris Kress, who's a sort of paleo guy I like. So that's it. So do your own research, basically. I know that's a bit dangerous thing to say these days. It probably makes me a white supremacist, but do your own research. So the only thing I've got to round off with, I think, is Ashley, how may our fans and viewers and listeners get in touch with us?
Well, Terry, I'm glad you asked. They can find us over at our Linktree page, which is unionoftheunknowns.com, and that has all the myriad ways to get in touch with us, from our Discord channel to our Twitter handle to our Gmail account and much more. Thank you so much. Please reach out to us. Back to you, Terry.
Thank you, Ash. Yes, I guess as I'm hosting, it's up to me to wrap the show up. So thanks very much to all our viewers and listeners. Keep those comments and questions coming. And we hope to see you on next time on Union of the Unknowns. And until then, if I'm channeling Keel at the moment, I will say, we are the Union of the Unknowns, and we are out.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Union of the Unknowns. You can find new episodes every week on all your favorite podcasting networks.